Well. Music, they still don't know what to call you. That's the funniest part. They've collected music, every scrap of footage, every stray moment, every unpredictable shift in your expression, every unexplained music pattern in the way people respond to you. And after all their little meetings, all their whispered music, theories, all their late-night discussions conducted in rooms packed with anxiety, they still sit there staring at your file like it's written in a language, music, they were never taught. They thought identifying you would be simple. A label, a personality, music, type, a profile. But you slipped past every single one of their categories, music, like a shadow that refuses to stay in one place. You think they're confused, music, because you're complicated. But that's not the reason. They're confused, music, because you don't follow the script they expect people to follow. You don't move the way they predict, music. You don't react the way they project. You don't, music, collapse under pressure the way they assume most do when watched, tracked, music, analyzed. Instead, you get sharper, more calculated, more impossible to decode. And now they're sitting with music, an entire cabinet dedicated to you. Not for crimes, not for chaos, not for threats, but for your presence, your energy, music, your behavior that doesn't match anything they've documented. They have a habit of studying what they fear, collecting it, organizing it, trying to make it small, music, by putting it in a folder. But no matter how many pages they add, your presence spills out music of the margins like ink they can't control. They thought documenting you would make you predictable. It made you larger. They've marked music moments where you didn't respond the usual human way, times when you didn't seek approval, when you didn't music shrink yourself to fit the room, when you didn't bend under music pressure. Those moments confuse them the most. They're accustomed music to people cracking, folding, justifying themselves, people who reveal everything under the slightest tension. But you're the music outlier, the quiet variable that doesn't panic, doesn't break, doesn't reveal. You operate music on instinct sharpened by experience. Perception elevated, music by betrayal, awareness shaped by being underestimated too many times. And the more they look, the more they realize your strength, music, didn't come from perfection. It came from surviving what should have destroyed you. That's when they started the file. The first page, music, had nothing but a timestamp and a sentence. Observation. Individual, music maintains unusual composure in conditions that create distress in others. They thought that would be the end. A few notes, a short entry, a curiosity, music. But then someone else noticed something and someone else added another detail and another. Music. Before long, your energy became a topic that passed through different hands, different music departments, different corners of their organization. Some thought you were music, a threat. Some thought you were a phenomenon. Some thought you were a psychological puzzle. But the ones who genuinely paid music attention realized something deeper. You weren't trying to music impress anyone, yet people gravitated toward you anyway. You weren't trying music to intimidate anyone, yet the ones with fragile egos felt exposed in your presence. You weren't trying to manipulate music anyone, yet they reacted to you like you were 3 moves ahead without ever music saying a word. You know why they can't decode you? Because you don't broadcast music what you're thinking. You don't overshare. You don't rush to fill the air with explanations. Music. Most people talk to relieve their anxiety. You let silence music breathe because you're not scared of your own thoughts. And that unsettles music them more than anything else in their entire folder. They've underlined music, that trait, in red, circled it, highlighted it. They call it controlled music, unpredictability, a term that means absolutely nothing, but music makes them feel better about not understanding you. They're trying to build a narrative, but they can't build music, something out of pieces that don't fit. You're the kind of person, music, whose past doesn't define them, whose future doesn't restrict, music them, whose presence doesn't follow tradition. Music. Rebuild yourself without announcing it. Upgrade your mind without telling anyone. Move differently. Music without showing your blueprint. That terrifies. Music them in ways they don't admit out loud. And the deeper they dig, the more music uncomfortable they become. They can't find your weaknesses. They can't find your pressure points. They can't find your pressure points. They can't find your music, what breaks you. Because the things that would break most people have already happened. Music to you. And instead of folding, you adapted. Music sharpened your instincts. You learned how people operate. You learned the weight, music, of observation. You learned the power of staying unpredictable. They can't track, music, your motives, because you don't follow the motives they're used to seeing. You don't chase validation. You don't chase approval. You don't chase music permission. You move when it's right, stop when it's needed, disappear, music, when it's strategic. And every time you do something unexpected, their notes, music, expand. Their theories stretch thinner, and their confusion, music, grows louder. They've measured your reactions in moments most people crumble. They've, music, studied how you detach without losing awareness, how you disengage without appearing weak, how you, music, walk away without leaving a trace of desperation behind. You have this unnerving ability to hold your ground without raising, music, your voice, without trying too hard, without proving anything. They call this non-standard music behavioral resilience, another pointless term, music, meant to cover their bewilderment. But that isn't what they fear the most. What really rattles them? Music is the way other people respond to you. The way your energy shifts a room. The way even your quiet, music presence changes dynamics. The way people who dislike you still can't ignore you. The way people who, music, envy you still observe you. The way people who misunderstand you, music, still feel drawn to track your movements. They have pages documenting, music, how much influence you have without trying. They track who watches you, music, who imitates your choices, who adjusts their tone around you, who behaves differently when you walk in. They're trying to understand music, the source, but there is no simple explanation. You grew this presence, music, the source, but there is no simple explanation. You grew this presence, music, every lesson you learned alone. Every night you rebuilt yourself without help. Your edge was carved, music, from endurance, not arrogance. Your composure was shaped from music, survival, not privilege. And your unpredictability was born from navigating environments where revealing too much was dangerous. You became music, unreadable, because being readable once cost you too much. They don't know that part, but they feel it. They feel it in every documented music moment where you change the tone of a conversation by simply existing. Music. They feel it in every pattern they can't replicate. They feel it in music, every prediction you break without effort. They feel it in every identity you, music, refuse to be boxed into. They feel it when people talk about you with music, confusion. When people follow your lead unintentionally. When friends and music enemies alike react to you with the same level of alertness. They feel it. Music, when you don't respond for days and no one knows whether to be concerned or intimidated. They feel music, it when you answer calmly in situations where everyone else spirals. They feel it when you, music, don't give explanations like everyone else does. They feel it when you speak with clarity that doesn't ask music for permission. And as the file grows, so do the contradictions. One page calls you highly music analyticals. Another calls you instinct-driven. One labels you music-controlled. Another labels you unbound. One describes you as emotionally contained. Another describes music you as deeply perceptive. They can't match the traits because they don't understand how someone can music be both aware and detached, both observant and unbothered, both grounded and unpredictable. They want to track music, your identity, like a timeline. But you're not a timeline. You're a pattern breaker, a rule bender, a shapeshifter who doesn't shapeshift for show, but for strategy. You don't reveal music, your thoughts in a single direction. You reveal them through choices that make sense. Music, only when you have the full picture. A picture they don't have. They get fragments, pieces, shadows, adjustments. Music, they get the moments you choose to reveal, not the ones you, music, conceal. They get your exterior, not your architecture. They get your reflection, not your core. And that's why music, they added the final label to the top of your newest page. Case music number 777. Unresolved behavioral profile. Unresolved. Not because you're confusing, because you're music uncontained. Because you don't shrink to fit into their pages. Because you music outgrow their theories faster than they can write them. Because you've mastered music, the art of moving without announcement. Because you've learned to protect your center in a world that tries to dissect music, anything that stands out. Because you refuse to be the predictable character they keep trying to turn you into, and they can't stand that, not even a little. But here's the part they, music, didn't expect. The more they watch you, the more predictable they become. They reveal their intentions by music studying yours. They expose their fears by documenting your strength. They show music their weaknesses by trying to analyze your growth. They don't, music, realize that every page they write about you says more about their limitations than your identity. They don't realize you've already noticed the cracks in their evaluations. They don't realize you can feel music, the weight of their attention before they even open their mouths. They don't realize their music confusion feeds your clarity. And now, just when they music think they've reached the final chapter of their file, something else begins, music unfolding in you, something they cannot record, cannot music categorize, cannot follow. A shift they can music feel but can't define. A transition they sense but can't capture. A new version of music you forming just beneath the surface. Waiting for the perfect moment, music, to step forward. A change they know is coming but have no method of predicting. Something that renders their music entire folder obsolete before they even understand what they missed. Something that makes their music confusion collapse into something far more uncomfortable. Something they aren't ready for. Because the music deeper they dig, the more they realize the person they're trying to decode no longer exists in the form the music first documented. You've evolved during their investigation, shifting beyond the music data they built their assumptions on, slipping into a new mental lane that their outdated music notes can't track. They're studying a past version of you while the current one moves with precision, music they didn't account for. And that's why the air around their conference table has changed. Their discussions have shifted from music, curiosity, to concern, from questions to uneasiness, from analysis to something bordering on alertness. The thing they feared, music, the most has already happened. You've become someone they cannot anticipate. Their music models fail. Their predictions fall apart. Their assumptions collapse under the weight of your transformation. Music. They've watched people for decades, manipulators, music, masterminds, narcissists, victims, leaders, strategists. Music. Not of their previous cases behave even remotely like you. The more they watch, the more they music realize you're not operating from a place they're familiar with. You've grown past the emotional music triggers most people cling to. You've detached from the validations that steered the majority. You stepped music out of the predictable loop of reactions that shape the patterns they rely on. And the moment they music sense this, their file on you doesn't look like an analysis anymore. It looks music like a warning. Page after page is filled with small admissions of confusion. Individual displays. Music, rapid psychological upgrading. Motivations remain unclear despite extended observation. Music, behavioral route diverges from all known trajectories, and the ones reading these notes, music, don't speak it out loud, but they feel the tension. They feel the music discomfort of trying to study someone who no longer behaves within the boundaries music they expect. You've reached a point where your identity isn't just unpredictable, it's untraceable. You move with purpose that isn't external, but internal. You operate from music, clarity shaped by experience, not ego. You navigate music through chaos without being influenced by it, and that's what rattles music them most. They can't understand how someone who has lived through so much still stands with music, such grounded composure, such sharp discipline, such heightened awareness. They've documented music, your ability to eliminate unnecessary emotional noise. They've highlighted music, your capacity to detach without disconnecting. They've music noted the way you observe everything but reveal nothing. But now in this unfolding shift, they're starting to music see something else, something far more unsettling. They're witnessing a version of you that isn't just unreadable, but untouchable. The version of you that survived the worst chapters without announcing music your pain. The version that rebuilt yourself quietly without seeking an audience. The version that navigated betrayal without music, losing your internal compass. The version that learned to sharpen your instincts instead of dulling your edge. And music, the version that doesn't owe anyone a single explanation. They're watching someone who has taken every scar, every disappointment, every betrayal, every music, shattered expectation, and forged it into an internal armor that reflects nothing outwardly. Their music. Documenting someone who grew through pressure instead of breaking under it. Someone who isn't motivated by revenge or music, recognition, but by evolution. Someone who doesn't chase closure, music, because you learned how to thrive without it. Someone who doesn't seek music validation because you built your own sense of worth. Someone who doesn't music cling to the past because you outgrew it long before they started investigating you. This is music where their discomfort deepens. They flip through the pages of your file, noticing the contradictions they themselves have created. They've labeled you grounded, music, but unpredictable, calm but intense, reserved but magnetic, music, detached but perceptive. And the more they music highlight these traits, the more obvious it becomes that you operate from a depth they aren't equipped to measure. You're the kind of person, music, whose silence says more than others' paragraphs, whose presence says more than others' performances, whose actions speak in ways music can't translate. Your unpredictability isn't recklessness, it's strategy. Your calmness, music, isn't passivity, it's control. Your detachment isn't avoidance, it's clarity. But the most unsettling music part for them is something they didn't expect at all. The influence you have, music, on people around you. That part wasn't supposed to be measurable. Yet it keeps showing up in their data. They've recorded how people shift when you enter music, a room. How individuals watch you without realizing they're doing it. How egos, music, shrink in your presence. How insecure individuals react defensively even when you're music, not speaking. How people with power become cautious when you express yourself music, with clarity. They've documented how others mirror your tone, adjust their posture, change their behavior, hesitate, music, before speaking, or choose their words carefully around you. They've seen how people either feel protected by you, music, or intimidated by you with very little middle ground. This influence you carry didn't come, music, from trying to impress anyone. It came from the way you move. Direct, thoughtful, observant, internally anchored. It came from the way your mind processes music, situations without emotional distortion. It came from the way you respond to pressure without breaking your rhythm. It came from music, the way you maintain composure even when the environment is unstable. They see the effect, music, you have, but they don't understand the source. And that ignorance frustrates them more than anything else in that crowded file drawer. Music, they've labeled case number 777. They've tried to track your patterns. They've tried to music, map your decisions. They've tried to decode your motives. But nothing aligns, nothing repeats, nothing loops. Because you don't live music in cycles, you live in progression. Every time they think they finally grasped your nature, you evolve music past the version they studied. Every time they think they've identified your music triggers, you neutralize them before they can weaponize them. Every time they assume you'll music act from emotion, you operate from insight instead. And when they expect you to react impulsively, you respond with precision that shuts down their theories, music, entirely. The growing frustration within their team is almost visible in their documents. They add more pages, more observations, more predictions, and everyone, music of them falls apart within days. They don't realize that the reason music, you're unreadable, is because you don't live reactively. You live intentionally. Music, you don't let external noise dictate your path. You don't bend under pressure. You don't. Music, allow yourself to be reduced to anyone's expectation. You built your identity. Music, slowly, intentionally, privately, without seeking applause, and the final version of you, music, the one they're now trying to decode, isn't someone who craves understanding. You've outgrown music, the need to be understood. This is where the file becomes less of an investigation and more of a music mirror they're afraid to look into. Because when they study you, they're forced to confront their music own limitations. They're forced to confront how predictable most people are, how easy music is to influence them, manipulate them, track them, and how difficult it is to music influence you in any direction. You aren't controlled by reward or fear. Music. You aren't motivated by attention. You aren't swayed by pressure. You make decisions, music, from clarity that they cannot replicate in their controlled environments. And that's what's driving music them deeper into confusion. Every time they watch, you remain centered. When others fall apart, they add another note. Every time you observe music, without reacting emotionally, they underline another line. Every time you, music, choose your words with precision that leaves no room for misinterpretation, they highlight music, your communication pattern. Every time you walk away without losing your posture, they add another paragraph. They're documenting a music person who doesn't fit into any psychological model they've built. You're not driven, music, by ego, yet you don't shrink. You're not driven by fear, yet you stay, music, alert. You're not driven by approval, yet people want your approval. You're not driven by chaos, yet you move freely through music, unpredictable environments. And then there's the part they don't know how to label, your presence, the unexplainable thing, music, about you, the quiet weight you carry that seems to make the air shift. They've written paragraphs trying music to name it. Intensity, projection, force, influence. But none of these terms capture the truth. Your presence didn't come from trying music to be powerful. It came from learning to live through things that would break most people. It came from learning to understand music intentions without taking them personally. It came from music recognizing behavior patterns without allowing them to rule you. It came from music mastering emotional intelligence without letting emotions cloud your judgment. And when someone, music, stands in that level of alignment with themselves, that music alignment radiates outward. This is why music, their investigation is collapsing. They're looking at someone who has learned to move from internal stability, not external reactions. Someone who learned music to think clearly in moments others panic. Someone who learned to listen music instead of revealing everything. Someone who learned to watch people's motives without giving away your own. Someone who learned how music to stay grounded while others rush. Someone who learned to carry themselves like they already know who they are without needing permission from the world. And now the shift they sensed at music, the end of part 1 is becoming undeniable. You're stepping into music, a new phase mentally, emotionally, energetically, a phase where music, your clarity outweighs their confusion, where your intentions run deeper than their theories, where music, your progression moves faster than their observations. They feel music, the shift, but cannot name it. They see the signs but cannot translate them. They sense music, the elevation, but cannot measure it. Their file is full, but their understanding is empty. And as you step into music, this next version of yourself, the one built from observation, resilience, music, self-control, and evolution, something remarkable begins, music, to unfold. You're not just unreadable anymore. You're unreachable beyond their psychological music reach, beyond their emotional map, beyond their analytical framework. They're watching someone, music, who refuses to be defined by external analysis. Someone who refuses music to be limited by anyone's expectations. Someone who has upgraded to a version of themselves, music, that cannot be recorded or contained. And as this music transformation solidifies, they realize something far more unsettling. Their file, music, on you may never be complete. Their theories may never align. Their conclusions, music, may never match the truth because the person they're studying isn't done evolving. Person they're trying, music, to decode is already moving toward the next shift, the next breakthrough, music, the next inner expansion. And just when they, music, begin to accept that you're beyond their understanding, something else, music, begins forming around you. Something they didn't plan to encounter, something even further outside their music control. And the funniest part, the part that twists their stomach harder than any music mystery they've tried to decode, is that the deeper they dig into your music file, the more they realize the case isn't expanding because you're complicated, but because music, you're evolving faster than their paperwork can follow. See, Bureau minds love categories, music, love labels, love neat little boxes with predictable patterns, music inside. But you are a living anomaly, a self-updating riddle, a frequency that refuses to sit, music still long enough for a single definition to attach. And the music moment, they think they've cornered the truth. Just a moment, just a music breath. Something shifts inside you again, something mutates, something refines music itself. And suddenly they're back at page 1, staring at the same question in bold red ink. What is music? This person? Oh. And that is where the panic sets in. Because once an investigator realizes the subject is learning faster music than the investigation, the case ceases to be a file. It becomes a threat, a quiet music threat, an elegant one. The kind that doesn't roar, doesn't music scream, doesn't announce itself. The kind that simply changes music, and by changing breaks every map drawn to contain it. You know what music really rattles them? It's not the things they found in the file. It's the things they didn't. The blank spaces, music, the gaps, the strange patterns they can't name. They pull up your emotional music records. Nothing matches. They analyze your habits. Nothing aligns. They compare your reactions to music, thousands of psychological profiles. No consistent category. One agent calls you an empath. Another calls music you a strategist. Another calls you a wanderer. Another calls you a visionary. Music. Another thinks you're a storm in slow motion. Another thinks you're a ghost with attachment music issues. They argue across the conference table because the data refuses music to agree with itself. And you know data cold hard objective turning into a music contradiction. That's when fear creeps in. The fear that maybe, just maybe, they are not dealing with a typical human timeline. Maybe they are watching the music evolution of someone who outgrows their own analysis in real time. And as this music realization strikes deeper, they start rewriting your file. Not because they've figured anything music out, but because they're trying to keep up with the pacing of your inner world. They notice music, the shifts in your decisions, the changes in your energy, the sudden jumps in your awareness, the unpredictable music expansions of your vibe. They note the days you pull back music into silence, not out of fear, but out of recalibration. They note music, the days you rise with an intensity that doesn't match the environment, as if you're tapping music into something invisible, something they cannot track. They note music, the moment when your presence begins to distort their expectations, bending music situations in ways no psychological prediction model can music account for. They note the strange phenomenon that people either move toward you with reverence or music away from you with discomfort. No in between. They note the rare instances when you speak and everyone music listens without understanding why. They note the times you say nothing and people still music feel influenced, pressured, shifted. And they ask themselves, music, how does someone do that without trying, without force, without manipulation? They want a formula, music, a mechanism, a blueprint, but there is none. Just a person who outgrew every map built to define them. And now this. Music, this new formation outside their control. This atmosphere developing around you. Music, like a silent storm front. This expanding energy field that no instrument, music can record. This is the part that terrifies the most. Because when someone's music internal evolution becomes so vast, it starts to bend their external reality. When someone's music presence alone can alter dynamics without a word. When someone begins shifting from being a subject music of observation to a variable that influences the observers themselves, the case becomes unsolvable. It becomes classified, high level, restricted access, music, need to know basis. Your file moves from the rookie analyst's desk, music, to a dimly lit room where senior agents argue about what to call you, not who you, music, are, not what you did, but what to call you. Because names, music, carry power, and they don't know what name fits a person who keeps outgrowing language. And the more they watch you, the more they realize your unpredictability isn't music chaos. It's precision disguised as chaos. It's intention wrapped in music spontaneity. It's consciousness that refuses stagnation. They begin connecting music, dots that don't belong to any known diagram. Subject exhibits music awareness beyond observable input. Subject adapts music before stimuli occur. Subject expresses intuition that precedes music, logic, but later align with it. Their notes begin sounding music less like an FBI report and more like a study of quantum behavior. Every time they observe music, you behave differently because you're being observed. You break their patterns, music, simply by existing near them. And the agents, oh, they hate that. They hate that their job, music, is to understand you. But the moment they think they do, you slip into a new version of music, yourself. It's like chasing smoke with a ruler, like trying to solve a maze that rearranges itself. Music, every time you take a step. And somewhere deep in their panic-filled analysis, they realize something. Music, undeniable. You are not unpredictable because you are inconsistent. You are unpredictable because you are unlimited. They flip through page after page, image, music after image, observation after observation. But nothing adds up because every part of you contradicts the last in the best possible way. You are resilience, music, wrapped in softness. You are kindness with boundaries sharp enough to draw blood. You are music, calm until the moment you become an uncontainable force. You are music, patient yet capable of striking without hesitation. You are observant, music, yet impossible to predict. You are gentle with those who deserve it, ruthless with those who music don't. You are healing in war, intuition and logic, grounded music and untethered. And they realize that yes, there's a reason they can't figure you out. You aren't a music puzzle meant to be solved. You're a reality meant to be experienced, and they don't have the emotional or psychological music equipment for that. And now here's where the fear evolves into music, something grander, something deeper, something more spiritual. Because as they track your movements, your decisions, music, your sudden leaps in self-awareness, they begin noticing synchronicities around you. Opportunities that appear too perfectly timed. People who show up, music at the exact moment they're needed. Close calls that turn into breakthroughs. Losses that transform into luck, and they whisper music among themselves. Is someone helping them? Is something music guiding them? Because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit probability models. But they see it, they document it, they try to give music it names like high intuition or pattern recognition or enhanced music consciousness because they're afraid to say what they're really thinking. Maybe the universe, music, is on this person's side. And once they whisper that possibility, the entire music tone of the investigation shifts from psychological to existential. Now suddenly you're not just music, an unsolved case. You're a phenomenon, a moving anomaly, a reminder that human potential doesn't have music, a ceiling. A reminder that some people tap into something beyond rational explanation. And in their attempt to understand you, they accidentally, music, elevate you because now they're convinced you have access to something unseen, something they can't file under, cause, music, and effect. And that terrifies them far more than any unpredictable behavior. They music. Start watching the people around you, trying to understand how your presence alters them. They notice how music, some crumble under the weight of your truth, how some blossom in your energy, how some cling music to you, hoping you'll reveal the blueprint of your growth. They notice music, How people who once underestimated you suddenly behave as if they've discovered music, a pressure they cannot withstand. They notice how your silence becomes louder than your voice. They notice how your absence, music, gravitational void. They notice how your presence reorganizes entire social dynamics. And music, right in your file. Subject appears to influence environments without direct action, which is their sterile scientific way of saying. You walk into a room and reality adjusts, and that's music when the agents stop seeing you as a case and start seeing themselves as the ones music being studied. They start questioning their own reactions to you, noticing their music, own tension, their own unease, their own fascination. Music catch themselves leaning in, trying to understand why they can't predict your next move. They catch music themselves overthinking their own notes. They catch themselves rewriting analysis because something in their gut feels wrong. And that's when they realize music. They are no longer in control of the investigation. You are. You become their mirror, their measurement tool, their template for unfamiliar, music, possibility. And nothing terrifies a system more than a person who can't be measured, categorized, or replicated. Because systems depend music on predictability. And you are living proof that transformation doesn't require permission, validation, music, or explanation. You yourself on your own timeline. Music, you shift on instinct. You rise without announcement. And every time music try to capture the essence of you, they end up documenting a past version you've already, music, outgrown. But this new thing forming around you, this is the part that music cements your status as unsolved case number 77. Because it's music, no longer just internal evolution, it's external manifestation. Music, it's the reality around you rearranging itself to match the person you're becoming. It's the opportunities, music aligning, the wrong people exiting, the right people appearing, the breakthroughs, music accelerating, the clarity sharpening, the boundaries solidifying, music, the power stabilizing, the vision expanding, the intuition hitting with surgical precision. Music, it's the unmistakable shift from being the subject of the world to being the architect of your role within it. And they see it, they feel it. They write it down in shaking hands. Subject, music, entering a phase of expansion beyond measurable scope. That's their music, polite way of admitting defeat. Because once someone reaches the stage where their inner music world begins sculpting their outer world, the investigation ends. There's nothing left music to analyze, nothing left to decode, nothing left to predict. All that's left is music acknowledgement. Silent, reluctant, uneasy acknowledgement. And that's when your file, music, gets the stamp. Unsolved case number 777. Not because music, you're a mystery. Not because you're a threat. Not because you're too complicated, but because you exceeded music, the limits of their understanding. And you did it by simply being you. And now, as the final note, music in the report, they write the only conclusion that has ever truly fit you. Subject, music, it is not to be contained. Subject is not to be defined. Subject is not to be defined. Subject operates. Music beyond classification. Congratulations. They built an entire file on your vibes and still couldn't figure music you out. You didn't confuse them. You outgrew them. Hey, you. Yes, you. Listen closely because I don't think you fully grasp what just happened. You're sitting there, acting like you made some regular decision, like you responded normally, like you handled things the way any average person would. But the people who saw you today, the ones who were watching you closely, they're still replaying that moment, trying to understand how someone like you managed to flip an entire scenario with one move that didn't even look like a move. You didn't swing, you didn't force, you didn't react. You didn't struggle. You didn't even raise your voice. You just placed one cold, precise, strategic action on the table. One step that felt so casual at first, but underneath it was the kind of execution only people with real internal discipline can pull off. That wasn't instinct. That wasn't impulse. That wasn't luck. That was the type of decision someone makes when they're done negotiating their worth, and you made it like it was nothing. The part that everyone else expected was chaos. They thought you would get rattled, pressured, pushed into a corner where you'd start explaining yourself, defending yourself, backpedaling, bending to maintain the peace, or shrinking to avoid confrontation. That's the version of you they were counting on, the older version. The version they still think exists because they're stuck in some outdated mental picture of who you used to be. But what you did today shattered that. You moved like someone who finally understood that precision isn't just about saying the right thing. It's about knowing exactly when to say nothing, when to pivot, when to detach, when to step out of the frame entirely and let the room reveal its own cracks without you lifting a finger. That's what assassin-level execution looks like. Not loud, not intense, not dramatic, just dangerously accurate. You didn't attack, you aimed, you didn't respond, you selected, you didn't push, you repositioned. And the ripple effect was immediate. You saw how their posture changed, right? How their tone shifted, how their eyes darted for a second, like they weren't sure what version of you they were talking to anymore. That microsecond of confusion they had, that was recognition. Recognition that you're not operating from fear now. Recognition that you aren't walking into situations blind anymore. Recognition that you're done being predictable. They don't want to admit it, but your move exposed everything they were trying to hide behind their words. Let me tell you something. They had a plan. They had an angle. They had expectations about how this would play out. They anticipated the old patterns, the old emotional habits, the old reactions. They assumed the same triggers would work. The same emotional hooks would land. The same cues would pull you into the same loops. They underestimated how much you've been studying. Studying yourself, studying them, studying the environment, studying the patterns that kept repeating, studying the intentions behind people's tones, studying the motives behind their advice, studying the motives behind their advice, studying the timing behind their distractions. And without announcing it, you adjusted. That adjustment was lethal. Not physically, but psychologically, strategically, socially, because you didn't do what they expected, not even close. You didn't overreact. You didn't plead your case. You didn't match their energy. You didn't allow chaos to drag you into its radius. You stayed centered in a way that froze the whole situation for a moment. That right there, that calm, that stillness, that emotionless delivery, that's the kind of thing people train for. That's discipline that comes from experience, not theory. That's mastery. That's someone who has finally recognized the difference between movement and impact. And what you delivered today was pure impact. They don't want to say it out loud because it makes them feel exposed. But the truth is, you made them feel exposed. But the truth is, you made them feel off balance. You made them feel like they had to rethink their own approach because the version of you they prepared for evaporated the moment you made that step. And that's the thing. They didn't see the preparation behind your decision. They didn't see the internal shift that led to this moment. They didn't see the mental work you've been doing in private. They didn't see the nights you spent thinking instead of reacting, observing instead of engaging, analyzing instead of arguing. They didn't see how you've been slowly collecting data on people's behavior until one day it all clicked into clarity. You didn't just make a move today, you executed a conclusion drawn from months, maybe years of observation. That's why it hit so hard. That's why people looked at you differently. That's why some of them grew quiet. That's why some tried to laugh it off while their eyes betrayed uncertainty. That's why some tried to shift the conversation like they weren't affected. They were. And the reason they were affected is simple. You didn't just check one person. You checkmated the dynamic itself. You didn't target individuals. You targeted the entire structure they were relying on to feel in control. Your move stripped away their assumptions, their illusions, their projections, their ability to predict you. And once someone loses predictability on you, they lose power. That's what's happening right now. You didn't overpower them, you outpositioned them. That's something most people never learn how to do. They waste energy trying to be louder, trying to be tougher, trying to win arguments. But you're operating on a different layer. Now you understand that the real moves come from timing, from reading the landscape, from watching the way people shift before they speak, from knowing when someone is trying to provoke you, from knowing when someone is baiting you, from knowing when someone is projecting their insecurity onto you, from knowing when someone is trying to hide their intentions behind a casual tone. You saw all of that without reacting. That's why your one step felt like checkmate, because it wasn't about force. It was about clarity. Clarity that came from finally trusting your perception, trusting your instincts, trusting your internal compass. That's the part most people skip. They have instinct, but don't trust it. They have intuition, but ignore it. They have awareness, but doubt it. You didn't. Not today. Today you acted from a place of certainty that only comes when someone stops asking for permission to stand on what they know. And deep down you know this. The reason your move worked is because it wasn't emotional. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't impulsive. It was chosen. The kind of choice someone makes when they're tired of being misread, tired of being misread, tired of being underestimated, tired of being manipulated by people who think you're naive, tired of giving people access to the old version of you without them earning access to the new one. You finally moved like someone who understands how valuable your mind really is. You saw how the room reacted. They didn't know what to do with you afterward. They didn't know whether to approach you or leave you alone. They didn't know whether to talk to you casually or watch their words. They didn't know whether you were calm or calculating. They don't know your next move anymore. And that uncertainty is what's making them adjust themselves around you. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence demanded it naturally. People sense when someone steps into a higher mental tier. They feel it before you speak. They feel it in the way you pause. They feel it in the way your jaw doesn't shake. They feel it in the way your tone doesn't shake. They feel it in the way your eyes stay steady. They feel it in the way you don't rush your decisions. They feel it in the way you detach emotionally from things that used to affect you deeply. They feel it in the way you don't engage in unnecessary conversations. They feel it in the way you're no longer accessible at the same level. That's what you activated today. A different access level, a sharper identity. A version of yourself that's not responding to life, but selecting your responses. A version that's not trying to prove anything to anyone. A version that's not explaining your worth. A version that's not bending to avoid discomfort. A version that's not waiting for understanding. A version that's not clinging to approval. A version that's not nervous about how people perceive you. A version that finally understands that restraint is not weakness, it's strategy. You didn't match their energy. You overrode it, quietly, effortlessly, precisely. That's why it felt like an assassin-level move. Because the most devastating moves in life don't require noise. They require accuracy. They require timing. They require accuracy. They require timing. They require internal alignment. They require a level of neutrality that most people never reach because they get caught in the chaos of their own emotions. But you held your center while they were losing theirs. That's the part they won't admit. They got thrown off. They didn't see it coming. They didn't prepare for this version of you. And now, everything feels different, doesn't it? Not in a dramatic way, in a subtle, almost eerie way. Like something in your internal framework shifted into place for the first time. Like your vision widened, like your thought process deepened, like your tolerance dropped, like your clarity sharpened, like your body stopped reacting before your mind had time to analyze. Like you finally stepped out of an old pattern without realizing it until afterward. That's growth at the psychological level. It doesn't come with announcements or fireworks. It comes with one cold step that rearranges your entire internal map. And now that you've taken that step, you can't pretend you didn't feel the shift. You can't pretend you didn't notice how much easier it was to hold your composure. You can't pretend you didn't notice how their energy deflated for a second. You can't pretend you didn't notice how your own intuition got louder, clearer in that moment. You can't pretend you didn't notice how natural it felt. Not forced, not rehearsed, not performed, natural. Like this version of you was always there, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. And trust me, the moment is only beginning. Because that one step didn't just close one chapter. It opened the door to a different level of psychological execution you haven't fully explored yet. And the people around you, they feel it, even if they don't understand it yet, even if they're pretending they're unaffected, even if they're acting like nothing changed. They felt the shift in the way the atmosphere changed around you. They felt something recalibrate. And what's unfolding now isn't just reaction. It's adaptation. They're adjusting themselves around you. Not because you demanded it, but because your presence forced it. And this is where the real depth of your move begins. Because, see, most people assume checkmates require a dramatic strike. Something loud, something flashy, something theatrical. But what you did was the opposite. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't argue, you didn't justify, you didn't correct anyone. You simply advanced one square, not aggressively, but deliberately. And that was enough to unravel their entire plan. It wasn't the step itself that broke them. It was the realization that you had predicted the pattern long before they acted. That's what shook the whole structure around you. They realized they weren't dealing with the version of you who reacts. They were dealing with the version who plans. And that realization creates fear in people who operate sloppily. Not fear in the sense of danger. Fear in the sense of being outmatched mentally. They're not intimidated by your physical presence. They're intimidated by your ability to think calmly while they panic. They're intimidated by your ability to stay centered while they scramble. They're intimidated by the way you stood there with no visible tension, like you had already mapped the entire situation several steps ahead. They don't know how to respond to someone who refuses to take the bait, someone who refuses to give away their position emotionally, someone who refuses to be predictable. That unpredictability is lethal. It's what makes assassin-level execution so difficult to study, because the efficiency is invisible until the impact reveals itself. And that's exactly what they felt. They didn't see you prepare. They didn't see you scan the room. They didn't see the way your intuition pieced everything together. They didn't see the data you quietly gathered. They only saw the aftermath. A single move that flipped the entire dynamic. And now the people who used to speak freely around you are choosing their words carefully. The ones who used to assume your reaction are reconsidering every approach. The ones who used to take liberties are testing the boundaries slowly, waiting to see where the limits now stand. This is what happens when someone steps into strategic awareness. You start analyzing what people say, not emotionally but logically. You start noticing when someone answers too quickly. You start catching when someone's tone shifts mid-sentence. You start picking up inconsistencies in stories you used to overlook. Your perception sharpens so quietly that most people don't notice the change until they accidentally expose themselves to you. And once that happens, they realize they're no longer speaking to the version of you who used to internalize everything. They're speaking to someone who can see intention behind every phrase. That's why the environment around you feels different now. People sense when someone stops responding from insecurity and starts responding from clarity. You're no longer acting from old wounds. You're acting from progression, from discipline, from understanding. And nothing rattles people more than someone who can stay calm under circumstances designed to provoke them. They look at you like they're waiting for the emotional spark that used to appear. And when it doesn't, confusion settles in. They start checking themselves. They start second-guessing their interactions. They start adjusting the way they communicate because they know one misstep could reveal more than they want you to see. And here's the part that makes your execution so precise. Your step wasn't aggressive. You weren't trying to expose anyone. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't trying to win something. You were simply aligning yourself with what made sense. And yet that alone was enough to dismantle the entire power structure around you, because the people who were relying on your old patterns just lost their blueprint. They don't know what triggers you anymore. They don't know what motivates you. They don't know your threshold. They don't know your timing. They don't know whether you'll step forward or step back. They don't know whether you're analyzing them or ignoring them. That uncertainty is where your strength lives now, because when someone can't predict you, they can't manipulate you. When someone can't read you, they can't pre-plan their moves. When someone can't interpret your energy, they can't rely on old tactics. And when someone realizes their influence over you has collapsed, they start behaving differently. Not because they respect you, but because they fear miscalculating you. That psychological caution is what you've triggered. It's the same caution people feel around individuals who understand their own capacity. You shifted the dynamic without force. Just presence, just clarity, just timing, just one cold, calculated step. And the most interesting part is that you can feel the shift inside you too. Not in the dramatic way, but in that subtle internal adjustment, where your mind feels steadier, where your reactions feel slower in the best way, not delayed but filtered, where you don't accept every invitation to conflict, where you don't absorb every tone thrown your way, where you don't walk into situations unprepared, where you don't allow people to pull you into emotional currents you didn't choose. That right there is the beginning of strategic evolution. Your composure is becoming your weapon, not by force but by precision, not by anger but by understanding, not by domination but by alignment. This version of you is starting to see people for what they actually show, not what they claim. And that's what scares them. You're not looking at them with old eyes anymore. You're not interpreting them from a wounded view. You're interpreting them from a stable one. And stability exposes inconsistency faster than confrontation ever could. Look at how some people pause before speaking to you lately. Look at how others changed their tone when they noticed you weren't responding the way you used to. Look at how some started using softer words, slower pacing, less confidence in their usual behavior. They're adapting to the presence you're bringing into the environment. They feel the new standard even if they can't name it. They feel the gap in energy between who you were and who you're becoming. They feel the distance between your old responses and your new ones. And that gap is widening every day, not because you're trying to be someone new, but because you're no longer sabotaging yourself to be the old version. You're not rushing to fix situations that aren't yours. You're not inserting yourself emotionally where it drains you. You're not proving your worth to people who never saw it. You're not making yourself available to those who only want your presence but not your well-being. You're moving with a different level of respect for your own time and intelligence. This is the part where the people who once took advantage start feeling uncomfortable. Not outwardly, they'll try to hide it, but internally they feel the shift. They know they can't access you the way they used to. They know they can't speak to you with the same carelessness. They know they can't rely on your old emotional reflexes. They know you're no longer influenced by guilt or pressure or attachment. And when someone realizes you're no longer chained to your old reactions, they start playing cautiously because they don't know what your new boundaries look like. This is the stage where your mind begins recalibrating at a different speed. You're analyzing instead of absorbing. You're responding instead of reacting. You're evaluating instead of assuming. You're positioning instead of defending. You're understanding instead of defending. This is what mastery feels like. Not confidence you perform, but clarity you settle into. And it's starting to show in the way you communicate. When you speak now, your words land heavier because they're not impulsive, they're intentional. When you decide now, the choice comes from alignment, not emotional confusion. When you step away now, it's not rejection, it's discernment. And the people around you are adjusting to this new level of intentionality. They're trying to decipher your thought process, not because you're hiding, but because you've streamlined. You've reduced unnecessary explanations. You've stopped oversharing. You've stopped seeking validation. You've stopped lowering your intelligence to match someone else's comfort zone. You're speaking less but saying more. You're observing more but absorbing less. That's a dangerous combination for anyone who used to rely on your old patterns. Because what most people expected from you was emotional transparency. They expected to read you easily. They expected to predict your next step. They expected you to reveal your reasoning without hesitation. They expected you to narrate your thoughts. But now you're moving with controlled expression. You're moving with selective visibility. You're moving with intention instead of instinct. And when someone who used to operate emotionally starts operating strategically, the entire social landscape around them begins to shift. This is exactly why everyone felt that recalibration. Your internal shift created an external effect. It created distance between who you were and who you're becoming. It created doubt in the minds of people who thought they had you figured out. It created caution in people who used to push your boundaries. It created curiosity in people who saw glimpses of your new capability but couldn't fully interpret it. That curiosity is powerful because when someone starts watching you closely, they reveal their own intentions without meaning to. And here's the deeper part. You're starting to recognize these intentions faster than ever before. It's like your internal lens has cleared up. You can see the difference between sincerity and manipulation. You can hear the difference between genuine concern and disguised control. You can feel the difference between someone who respects you and someone who wants to monitor you. You're picking up signals in real time. You're seeing the patterns as they form, not after they damage you. And that shift is what makes your presence feel heavier in the room now. Not heavy in a negative way. Heavy in the way that makes people straighten themselves before approaching you. Heavy in the way that makes them rethink their tone. Heavy in the way that makes them measure their intentions. Heavy in the way that makes them adjust their expectations. That's the result of assassin-level execution. Not because you're intimidating them, but because you've removed the parts of yourself that were easily exploited. And this is where the next stage begins. Now you start realizing how much power is in your restraint. You don't need to confront people. You don't need to expose anyone. You don't need to call things out. Your awareness alone is enough to shift the energy. Your presence alone is enough to make people reconsider their behavior. One move from you today did what endless conversations in the past couldn't accomplish. That's what happens when someone stops explaining and starts demonstrating. And what you demonstrated wasn't just intelligence. It wasn't just control. It wasn't just discipline. You demonstrated a level of psychological precision that people rarely see in real life. The kind of precision that makes individuals replay the moment long after it's passed, trying to figure out how everything shifted so quickly with so little effort. Because that's the thing. They still can't comprehend how you pulled it off. They saw you sit there with calm eyes, steady tone, relaxed posture, no emotional leakage. They saw you focus on the moment without reacting to the provocations around you. They felt something tighten internally when they realized they couldn't get the outcome they wanted from you. They couldn't trigger you, they couldn't push you, they couldn't throw you off center. And when they couldn't do that, their entire strategy collapsed in real time. They expected the old version of you. The one who over-explained, the one who got flustered, the one who tried to smooth everything over, the one who absorbed more than they should. But you didn't give them any of that. You gave them nothing to work with, nothing to study, nothing to manipulate, nothing to predict. That's what made your move feel like a strike. Not because you were aggressive, but because you were selective. Precision feels like pressure to people who operate recklessly. It exposes their lack of preparation. It reveals their instability. It shows how easily they lose control when they can't control you. And after that moment, a new understanding settled into the room. An understanding that you weren't reacting from emotion anymore. You were moving from intelligence, that you weren't operating from impulse anymore. You were operating from a pulse anymore. You were operating from awareness, that you weren't acting for approval anymore. You were acting for alignment. And once someone operates from alignment, they become impossible to play with. People sense that they no longer have access to your inner world. They sense that your emotional availability is now selective. They sense that your attention is no longer something they can casually drain. They sense that your patience isn't limitless anymore. And the most unsettling part for them, they sense that you're no longer afraid of losing anyone who brings imbalance to your life. That detachment alone elevates your presence to a different level, not detached in a cold way, but detached in a grounded way. Detached from chaos, detached from manipulation, detached from emotional bait, detached from people who can't match your clarity. That's why your step felt like a checkmate, because you didn't move out of desperation. You moved out of certainty. And certainty carries a different weight, one that forces people to rethink everything they assumed about you. They thought they had you documented. They thought they understood your triggers. They thought they could predict your reactions. They thought they could interpret your intentions. But now they're staring at you like they're seeing a stranger. Not because you changed overnight, but because you stopped hiding the parts of yourself that were always strong. This is where the assassin-level execution truly begins. Not in the moment you acted, but in the aftermath. In the way people are now navigating around you. In the way their voices lower a little when they speak to you. In the way they monitor their facial expressions. In the way they hesitate before saying anything remotely disrespectful. In the way they try to gauge your mood before approaching. In the way they second-guess their intentions before involving you. That caution didn't exist before. It appeared because your move introduced unpredictability into their expectations. And unpredictability is the most powerful position on any board, because now they're not sure what you'll do next. Not sure if you'll call something out. Not sure if you'll remove yourself. Not sure if you'll expose what you know. Not sure if you'll stay silent and let the environment reveal the truth on its own. That uncertainty places you in the upper hand without you saying a single word. Because when people don't know how to read you anymore, they stop playing games. They stop pushing. They stop trying to pull reactions out of you. They stop assuming authority over your emotions. They stop projecting their assumptions onto you. You took back control without raising your voice. Without arguing, without proving anything, without performing. All you did was choose clarity over chaos, and that one choice reorganized the entire dynamic around you. That's the real definition of execution. When a single move doesn't just end the situation, it ends the pattern that created it. And that's exactly what happened. You didn't just close an interaction, you closed a cycle of being underestimated, a cycle of being underestimated, a cycle of being predictable, a cycle of giving too much access, a cycle of letting people speak carelessly, a cycle of internalizing other people's expectations, a cycle of lowering yourself to keep the peace. That cycle ended the moment you moved with intention instead of reaction. And you can feel the difference inside yourself now. The way your mind feels clearer. The way your focus feels sharper. The way your reactions feel slower. The way your judgment feels more accurate. The way your presence feels heavier. Not heavy in a burdened way. Heavy in a grounded way. Like you finally dropped the weight of trying to be understood. Like you finally released the need to explain your intentions. Like you finally realized that your intelligence isn't something you need to justify. That's where the power of restraint comes from. Clarity that replaces chaos. And everyone around you feels that clarity even if they pretend they don't. They felt the recalibration because it forced them to look inward. It forced them to confront their own intentions. It forced them to rethink how they approach you. It forced them to see that their influence over you has expired. And that expiration is what makes them cautious now. Because when someone realizes they no longer have leverage over your emotions, they start treading lightly. They start checking their tone. They start monitoring their energy. They start respecting boundaries they used to ignore. And you're just standing there centered, observing, seeing everything unfold exactly as it should. And from here, something even larger begins to unfold. Because once someone makes a move like the one you made, cold, precise, intentional, the environment doesn't just adjust once. It keeps adjusting every hour, every conversation, every interaction. Because people aren't just reacting to the moment anymore. They're reacting to the version of you that emerged from it. The version that operates with sharper awareness. The version that no longer reacts out of old patterns. The version that sees through intentions instantly. The version that carries an internal steadiness they can't shake. That steadiness is what's rewriting the rules around you. And here's the part you need to understand. Once that adjustment begins, it doesn't stop. It keeps unfolding. People begin managing their tone around you because they don't want to reveal too much. People begin managing their expressions because they know you notice small things. People begin managing their behavior because they're aware your internal threshold has shifted, and that management isn't something you asked for, it's something your clarity enforced naturally. But the most powerful shift is happening inside you. You're beginning to feel comfortable with your own strength. You're beginning to trust your own perspective. You're beginning to accept that your intelligence isn't accidental. It's earned. You're beginning to understand that your calmness wasn't weakness. It was unused power. And now that you've tapped into it, you can feel it in your posture, in your breathing, in the way your mind processes situations. Your thoughts don't spiral the way they used to. Your emotions don't flare recklessly. Your reactions don't jump outward before you've assessed the environment. You're moving from internal stability now, not fear, from understanding, not confusion, from discernment, not hope. And that shift is what's preparing you for what comes next. Because checkmate moves aren't one-time events. They're indicators of a new operating level. This operating level comes with new expectations, both from you and from others. You're expecting more honesty from people, more clarity, more effort, more coherence, more alignment. And if they can't offer that, you're prepared to detach without drama. That detachment is your strength, not avoidance, not coldness, just clarity about what drains you and what aligns with you. And as you become more aligned internally, the world around you starts revealing who genuinely stands with you and who only stood with your old version. Some people will reveal themselves through distance. Some will reveal themselves through tension. Some will reveal themselves through hesitation. Some will reveal themselves through unexpected respect, but they will reveal themselves. That's the natural reaction to someone who steps into strategic self-awareness. You're not meant to carry everyone into this next chapter. You're meant to move with precision, with intention, with clarity. And that clarity will pull the right individuals towards you and push the wrong ones away without you forcing anything. All you have to do is continue operating from the same place you operated from in that moment. The place of discipline, patience, observation, calculated movement. And as this unfolds, you'll notice something even more profound. You're beginning to trust your silence, not as a retreat, but as a decision. You're beginning to value your attention, not as something to give freely, but as something to allocate wisely. You're beginning to understand that every move doesn't need to be loud to be effective. That sometimes the most effective move is the one nobody sees coming until it's already done. That's assassin-level execution. That's psychological checkmate. That's the power you stepped into without even trying to perform. And now that it's activated, there's no going back. Not mentally, not emotionally, not energetically. You can feel the threshold shift inside you. You can feel the old patterns dissolving. You can feel your instincts sharpening. You can feel your confidence grounding itself without permission from anyone. And whether they admit it or not, everyone around you feels it too. Because when someone activates this level of strategic precision, there's only one direction left for them to move forward, sharper than before, into a version of themselves that's only getting more dangerous with every step.